think that cancel culture is one of the worst developments of the modern age, and it should. And although I don't think anything should be banned, if I thought something should be banned, it would be that.
You're listening to an episode of the podcast Porträttpodden, or The Portrait in English. This is the show where I interview my biggest heroes, those who greatly influence and inspire me, who make me think, and who helps me better understand the world I'm living in. My name is Mats Lasse Jangås. I'm a Norwegian independent journalist and podcaster, and together with my guest at this time, game designer and tabletop role-playing legend Sandy Petersen, will be the voices in your head for the next hour. Sandy grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and as a kid he was fascinated by and in love with dinosaurs and paleontology. But a chance discovery of the works by author H.P Lovecraft in his father's basement would take him on a journey spanning close to 60 years, taking him metaphorically face to face with the great old ones and Cthulhu himself through his creation of the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, and with that scarring and traumatizing players all over the world since the 80s. I was hugely honored that Mr. Petersen graciously took time out of his busy schedule to have this conversation with me, and I hope it brings you the inspiration and guts to go out there and create your greatest masterpiece. With that, here is Sandy Petersen.
I've always been interested in games. I used to stay in from recess at grammar school sometimes to play Clue or some other game. In 1980, I started to write to Chaosium and talked about some game ideas I had for their game, RuneQuest.
RuneQuest is a fantasy tabletop role-playing game originally designed by Steve Perrin, Ray Turney, Steve Henderson, and Warren James. Set in Greg Stafford's mythical world of Glorantha, it was first published in 1978 by Chaosium. RuneQuest is notable for its system designed around percentile dice and an early implementation of skill rules, which became the basis for numerous other games.
And they published some of them, and I was going to school at the time. And then I offered to do a game that would be H.P. Lovecraft's Dreamland designed for RuneQuest. And they said, we're doing a modern era Lovecraft game with like guns and monsters based on Lovecraft's main work. And so we're going to do that instead. So then I said, I'm really interested in helping on that in any way that I can. And they wrote back and said, we're not happy with the way it's going, so we're going to give the whole project to you. So over the next year, I wrote Call of Cthulhu on a typewriter. And sent it in, and that was my first actual game as opposed to game supplement.
The horror fiction role-playing game based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft, first published in 1981, is now in its 7th edition and quickly became one of the biggest games in its field, with several foreign language editions being licensed as well.
After then, I moved to California for graduate school, and to support myself and my wife and child while I was going to graduate school, I started typesetting and editing for Chaosium. And because I was in school not that far from where they were. Eventually, my avocation of gaming got more and more interesting to me, and graduate school got less and less interesting. And though I don't recommend this career path to anybody necessarily, I eventually dropped out of graduate school and became a full-time designer. I worked at Chaosium doing games and role-playing games mostly, though I did also work on Arkham Horror until 1988. And then basically feeling poor and having 4 kids at the time, I took a job offer at Microprose Software, the people that did Gunship and Civilization. And I went there, and I was a game designer there. And actually one of the games I worked on was Civilization, though Sid Meier was the chief designer. I did work too. You can find me on the credits. And I did other things. And in 1993, Microprose was starting to fall apart because Wild Bill Staley, the owner, had essentially gone barking mad. And so I moved to Texas and became a designer for id Software, where I worked on Doom, Doom 2, and Quake. In fact, I did the majority of the levels in Doom and Doom 2. Quake, I only did about a fourth of them, but it was a more complicated game, and we had more designers. I left id Software and went to Ensemble Studios, which was also in Dallas area where I was in Texas. And I worked there until 2009 on the Age of Empire series, when Don Matrick killed Ensemble Studios because he thought it would increase his stock options. And I think it did not do Microsoft good share value, because we've never sold less than 1 million copies of any game. But hey, anyway, I was pretty happy when Matrick got kicked out into a cloud when the Xbox Live launch tanked. Yeah. That was glorious. But anyway, it wasn't necessarily bad that we got rid of Ensemble Studios, maybe for the gamers, but not for us, because we all went on to form other companies. And what I did first, I went to I guess I have had another job besides game designer, because I taught game design to graduate students for 2 years, from 2009 to 2011. But I was still teaching game design, so it's not that different. Then I was briefly in a small failed iPhone game company during the course of which my brother died. And then I founded Petersen Games, and I've been doing Petersen Games ever since. Yeah. And so I'm back doing tabletop board games and role-playing games. So I've kind of gone full circle. The most complicated, huge games like Quake and Age of Empires back to board games. Yeah. And I like doing board games and role-playing games a lot, because the computer games, while they had their virtues, there was a team of, depending on the game, from 8 to 75 people. And you were always, it was, and it took years to do, at least the way we did it. And on the board game, I can do it a lot quicker. It's a much smaller team. I'm the main designer. I have help, but it's not 75 people, which means that it's kind of more fun to design. And also I don't have to share the money with Microsoft. Oh. So although the overall money is less, it is not split among 25,000 people. No. And that's how I got where I am today. Yeah. Sick from COVID in my house with a bunch of games on the shelf behind me.
Yeah. Just to mention that for anyone listening who dozed through the introduction, I'm of course joined by one of the greatest minds in tabletop role playing. He's got so many fingers and so many pies, he might as well be known as Sweeney Todd. I'm of course chatting here with Sandy Petersen from Petersen Games, the man behind Call of Cthulhu, among other things, and we'll get into Lovecraft during the course of this conversation as well. Right. I don't want to bore you by going too far back, but
if you're going to Call of Cthulhu, you have to go far back, because that is literally the first full game I ever did.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And, but that's okay. Okay. Because it did start me where I am now. It popularized Lovecraft, because he was very obscure before then. Yeah. I mean, you're in the Netherlands, right?
I'm in Germany.
Germany, okay, sorry.
At the time when this interview was recorded, I was still living in Germany with my then girlfriend. I've now moved back to my native Norway.
I guess I shouldn't apologize. I go to Germany every year.
Oh, okay.
I go to a small game convention in Eastern Germany called the Kraken.
Ah, yeah, that's right.
And so I have many German friends. I think my wife, she loves Germany. She has German ancestry. I don't, but whatever. And so yeah. Where are you in Germany?
I'm in Dortmund.
I know where that is.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah. And we were thinking about going to Essen this year, but I don't think we will. I think it's still too soon.
Okay. Yeah.
I do like. I mean, okay, I don't exactly like going to Essen, but man, there's a lot of stuff. It's draining, Yeah. But it's cool too.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the Essen Game Spiel, of course. If you have non-German listeners, it's like.
Not just randomly going to Essen. That would be.
It was in Essen that I had went to the worst Korean restaurant I've ever been to.
No, that's the story. Do tell.
Well, I love Korean food, which we get quite a bit in America. So I went to this Korean restaurant. I said, I'm so excited. We'll get the big Korean feast. And it was so terrible. For what, like they brought in the first dish and it was a shrimp stir fry. Okay, nothing wrong with that. Then they brought in the second dish and it was a different shrimp stir fry. And they didn't have the banchan, which is a major part of Korean food in Korea and America, where they give you separate little bowls of little vegetables or dried fish or things like that. You have 6 to 10 of these bowls for a little snacking thing. None of that. And then it took 4 hours to feed us, which I thought was kind of slow. And we were missing our drive back to Frankfurt. So I asked the people in charge. I said, "So this food isn't anything like the Korean food in America. Is this more accurate or less?" And they said, "Well, it's less." I said, "We're doing what the Germans would like." And I thought to myself, I don't think the Germans would like a 3-hour meal with no free banchan. And anyway, so that is my story.
They say the Germans have
maybe
no
it's not a great story,
humor.
but usually I love German food. So I thought I'll treat my buddy Fabian to Korean food. And I wasn't able to because it was not.
Well, we can't have everything in life, can we?
Germany has been stepping up its skill with steaks, though. When I first started going to Germany in 2001, you couldn't get a good steak anywhere, and it's starting to improve.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Enough about food. I must be hungry.
Yeah. If I've done my research correct, you're born in St. Louis, Missouri?
That is correct. I lived there till I was about 5.
Okay.
And then moved to not very far away, actually, in Illinois. And I've lived in several states. I mean, I've been in Texas longer than anywhere else I've lived.
Okay.
I moved here in 1993, and I've stuck. So,
from what I've heard, I've never been outside of Europe, but from what I've heard, Texas is a lovely state. So
Texas is not a lovely state to look at, but it's a great state to visit because it has amazing food, amazing people, and amazing stuff going on, like rodeos and carnivals and state fairs and theme parks and caverns, but it's flat as a pancake. I mean, you can stand on a beer can and see both oceans, so it is beautiful in the spring in April and May when the wildflowers bloom, and they're all along the freeways and everywhere. Beautiful wildflowers, bright blue, blue bonnets, orange Indian paintbrushes, and all kinds of other flowers. And then that lasts for about 4 to 6 weeks, and then it's back to being as ugly as East Texas, as we put it.
Okay. Oh well.
But there's still stuff here. Oh yeah, and the Houston Space Center.
Yeah.
Want to go inside a space shuttle? That's kind of cool, right?
If you want to get closer to the great old ones, you might as well go to Houston.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And there's there's lots of things to do in Texas. But if I was going to go to America and I was you, that is probably not where I would first go unless you were desperate to visit me. Yeah. I would instead go to Yellowstone or the Grand Canyon because they are amazeballs. And you'll have never seen anything like it.
No. They say Europe has a lot of great nature and
it does.
And it does, but I would love to go to the U.S. one day and just have a look around at the great country.
The U.S. not only has a lot of great nature, it's actually bigger than Europe, so it has more nature, and it's more varied than Europe. Like we have rainforests, and we have giant swamps and deserts, like the Mojave, which are beautiful deserts. I mean, you got the Dolomites and stuff. It's not saying Europe's is completely, but
we also got wars and.
Well, we've had our share of wars too. Plus, we get involved in your wars.
Yeah, always come and
we get pulled over. My father-in-law was in World War II. Oh, he said he always shot in the air, hoping he wouldn't kill anyone.
Yeah.
But he got shelled, so. And he liberated one of the camps at Dachau.
That's something to be proud of.
Yeah. My uncle was in the occupation army for Japan. He just missed having to fight the Japanese. I'm sorry.
Oh, good.
Let me do this. She is somewhat obedient. Okay, sorry about that.
All good. I have a dog too. He usually only makes noise when I'm trying to record a podcast. So
yeah.
I know the
Apparently that's what mine did. Well, but
speaking of the devil.
Yeah. Oh, is your dog there?
Yeah.
Mine's only a mutt.
Yeah, mine's it's a bulldog. So it's not the biggest, but it's not the biggest.
It's a friend. Now the dog's happy. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so go ahead. Let me turn the sound up a little bit.
Okay. So how does a kid from St. Louis, Missouri, who's in love with dinosaurs and paleontology get into game design?
Well, I also liked games. I love playing with dinosaurs. And in fact, you can look at this full circle. When I was a kid, my favorite toys were big plastic dinosaurs in bright colors. Yeah. You know, purple and orange and green, just like real dinosaurs. And I loved these. Okay. And when I was 8 years old, I read my first Lovecraft book. Yeah. I was one of those annoying, precocious kids that no one likes. Well, I mean, my friends like me, but I read all these books. So I read this book, and it was scary, and I loved it. Yeah. And then after I read the story of the Call of Cthulhu, I guess I was 9. I wanted to have a big plastic Cthulhu, you know, because how cool would that be? Yeah. You could play with the dinosaurs. And then it has taken me 60 years, almost 60 years, but finally I have built my own game company, and I make big, brightly colored Cthulhu monster figures. So I finally have the toys that I wanted when I was 8 years old. Yeah. So it finally achieved that goal. Yeah.
Only took you 60 years and founding a game company, but at least.
Hey, how many people never get their goal, right? Yeah. I got my goal. It's maybe I should have aimed at world peace, but I aimed at big plastic figures of Cthulhu, and in fact, just before the war started in Ukraine, we had a deal with a Russian company to publish one of my games there. Okay. And we published it, and they paid us. They were going to pay us half the money up front and then half after they sold it, which is pretty normal. Yep. And then they couldn't pay us the other half because the war started. So it's actually not their fault.
Okay.
Not the company's fault. It's Putin's fault, right? Yeah. I have no idea what the Russian company's stance is on the war. I just know they can't pay us the money. Yeah. So the war has financially hurt me.
Yeah. Well, it's.
I have sacrificed for it in a sense.
Yeah, and
though unwillingly.
Most of my audience listening will, of course, know who you are very well, and will have played most of your games, and especially Call of Cthulhu. We'll get to that in some of the audience questions we have here later. But you discovered Lovecraft at a very young age, at the age of 8. My first introduction to Lovecraft was Call of Cthulhu, and
I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
In fact, when I published Call of Cthulhu, every single person I knew who had heard about Lovecraft had learned about Lovecraft from me. Yeah. Okay, I hadn't met anyone who heard about Lovecraft on their own. Right? Yeah. So he was vanishingly obscure. Any critics just thought he was terrible. In fact, Chaosium thought Lovecraft was terrible. They just wanted the license. But this is Chaosium's genius. Greg Stafford, the head of Chaosium, he thought that Lovecraft was a hack, just like everyone else. You remember, Lovecraft is not an author that you have to read to get an opinion on. Nope. You can just say, oh, he's bad without reading him, apparently. Go figure. So they decided he was bad. But most companies, when they have a license that they don't respect, will simply do it tongue-in-cheek, kind of making fun of it, mocking it, toning it down. Let me give you an example. The third Batman movie back in the day, Batman versus Robin, that was done by a guy that didn't respect superheroes. And it was terrible because the guy was, no one can take superheroes seriously. I'll just make fun of it. Right? Mm-hmm. And so, but Chaosium was smart. They said, if we do it, we will be snarky and mocking. So we'll have Sandy do it. He loves Lovecraft. He'll do a good job, and he's never missed a deadline. Yeah. And so that's what they did. But then they also knew they had to have something to kind of hang their hat on to be excited about. So what they picked was the 1920s setting, because they were excited about the 1920s, even though not Lovecraft. Since then, they learned to love Lovecraft. But at the start, that's what they did. I actually have an award from the Necronomicon convention for because they said that there was 2 people that popularized Lovecraft worldwide. They said one of them was me, because of doing the Call of Cthulhu game, kind of, even if you didn't play Call of Cthulhu, if you played role-playing games, you knew about Call of Cthulhu, right? And the other was Stuart Gordon from his movies. He started 4 years after I did, but those movies are influential. So you had the gaming culture and the film culture both going through the population, and now you have Lovecraft. He's a meme. I mean, right? He's super well known. So I did not expect that to happen. I thought it would be a game that would appeal to a tiny number of fans and maybe go through a $10,000 print run and then be gone. But it's still around. It's been 40 years and 41 years. It's still selling. So, and it's still highly popular. I think it's in its 7th edition. Yeah. And I don't know, it's 30th print run.
At least we have to commend Chaosium for making the decision to put it into your hands, a passionate fan of Lovecraft. Otherwise, we would have had, if we'd gone the Batman Robin route, we'll have Cthulhu credit cards and Cthulhu nipples.
Yeah, they would not have done the same thing. It would have been like Ghostbusters, which is not necessarily bad, but it's not Lovecraft. Yeah. But yeah, no, they did the right thing, and they have supported it well over the years, I think. I mean, there was a while when they were penniless and they couldn't really do a full support, but now Chaosium is kind of back in the saddle again. They got a new management, partly due to me.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, what had happened is that originally, the way it worked, there was 3 people: Lynn Willis, Charlie Crank, and Greg Stafford. Each owned a third of Chaosium, and I had a tiny share. I had like 3%. They gave me 3% as like a booby prize because they liked me. So I go away with my 3%, and then Lynn Willis passed away tragically, and the company bylaws say that his shares don't pass to his widow. They are bought back by the company, and she gets the money for it. So that meant that Charlie Crank and Greg Stafford each had half of the shares, except for it was like 5% now because there was fewer shares. So, and Greg and Charlie at this point were hostile to each other. Charlie with Lynn had forced Greg out of the company, so he wanted to go back in and take over the company. So both Greg and Charlie were trying to get me. I was the kingmaker with my little bit of shares. I could choose who would win. And so they were both being nice to me. And so in the end, I decided that Greg was more sincere, because when Greg was at Chaosium, he paid me royalties. And when Charlie was in Chaosium, he didn't pay royalties until he found out I was the kingmaker. Then he offered to pay back royalties. And that was like 15 years of back royalties. So I was like, yeah. Anyway, so what happened is we gave Charlie a buyout, which he was unhappy with. But hey, it wasn't all about making him happy. No. And then Greg and I owned Chaosium, and then we sold it to. We changed the bylaws and sold it to the Red Moon Enterprises, and then there's 4 guys that run Chaosium, and they're doing a good job. They've built it back up. They've got RuneQuest back in it. They're trying to get Pendragon and some other things. So, I mean, Call of Cthulhu was still 85% of their sales. Yeah, but if you're going to have a one-trick pony, it's nice to have one that's big.
That's right. Call of Cthulhu, the role-playing game, is like you touched upon, it's set in the 20s. The core game. That was
Chaosium's thing. Yeah. See, when I played it, even though I often played it in the 20s, I didn't use the 20s for anything. Because a lot of you have cars, you have guns, you have telephones. It's not that different. But when I play it nowadays, I don't play it in the 20s. I play it in modern times. Yeah. I think it is easier to make something scary in modern times than in the 1920s, because you're less distanced from it. Also, it's easier for the players, especially now that the 20s are literally 100 years ago. Yeah. I don't have to look up what the gun laws were or whether they had electric service in this city. I just use this. I can use a modern thing. Now, I know some people love the 20s, and there's nothing wrong with them loving the 20s. I'm just saying that I prefer the modern era.
Yeah.
I think it brings it home more. That said, I do run games that are set in other eras. You know, I have a scenario I run that's set in 1946, for example, in occupied Japan. And it involves Japanese war crimes and the chochos. But so, you know, different things. So, but they did set it in the 20s, and that was, some people really like that way, and that's more power to them.
Yeah. And like I said, most people who knows about Lovecraft knows about him through you, and then they get onto the books and the literary university they created. So do you feel like you had a sort of responsibility to bring Lovecraft back into the consciousness of?
Well, at the time, that's not how I was thinking. I was just like, I wanted to have a Lovecraft game because it was cool. I wanted to be as much like Lovecraft as I could, you know. And in fact, I gotta say, one of the reasons I run it in modern times is because Lovecraft didn't write his stories in the 1920s. I mean, he did, obviously, because that's when he wrote them, but he was trying to write the most modern era possible. He had cutting edge science. He had airplane exploration of the Antarctic. He had submarines. He had ultraviolet rays. He had astronomical discoveries. He was doing like the most advanced science available to him. So I feel that you can channel that, you know. Now I feel that I have, I mean, I guess I don't feel like I anymore have the responsibility to give Lovecraft to everybody because it's kind of happened. And most of the credit for that, I think, has to go with Lovecraft. When people read his stuff and they go, whoa, and then they understand, and then, you know, he gets better. And so starting with Call of Cthulhu and Stuart Gordon's films, now there's more movies and there's comic books and everyone starts channeling the influences because more overt. Stephen King puts Lovecraft stuff into stories, you know, and I think I may have tipped people off to his existence, but Lovecraft had to do the work of getting them to be fans.
Yeah.
No matter how much I say Lovecraft is good, no one's going to care unless he is actually good.
Yeah, that's right. Might have got my research wrong here, but I think I might have read somewhere that in his own time, Lovecraft wasn't even that big of a deal.
He wasn't. No, your research is correct. Seabury Quinn was a bigger name in the Weird Tales magazine. There's people that like Lovecraft, obviously. Yeah. But here's the thing about Lovecraft that made him unusual. He didn't just write the stories. I mean, he wrote the stories, but he did some things that hadn't been done before. First off, he created a shared literary universe. I don't think it was ever done before then. He got other authors to write stories with his characters and his books and his cities. No one had done that. So when I was reading Lovecraft when I was 8 or 9, 10 years old, I'd read a story by Lovecraft and there would be the Necronomicon. And then I'd read a book by someone totally different and it had the Necronomicon. It was like, is this a real thing? It was creepy, right? Yeah.
The Necronomicon, also referred to as the Book of the Dead, or under the purported original Arabic title of Kitab al-Atsif, is a fictional grimoire or textbook of magic, first mentioned in Lovecraft's 1924 short story The Hound. Among other things, the Necronomicon is said to contain an account of the Old Ones, their history and the means for summoning them.
The other thing he did was he was extremely active in the Amateur Press Association. That was like the blogs or podcasts of the day. It was a mailing you go around to like-minded people, and in corresponding with other horror writers talking about horror. He would mentor other horror writers who were younger to teach them things and make them better. So he created a lot, like Robert Bloch. He kind of created out of nothing. Auguste Derleth, and all these authors. He improved and made them better. Plus, so he actually helped create like this whole oeuvre, to use French, of Lovecraftian and cosmic horror thinking, and spread it. So he was hugely influential behind the scenes in a way that few authors have been. Like Seabury Quinn wrote stories that everyone liked in Weird Tales, but he didn't do all this correspondence and mentoring. He just wrote stories, you know. So also his stories don't stand the test of time the same way.
No, that was also something I really wanted to get your thoughts on is that take the Necronomicon for example. It shows up in the Evil Dead movies.
Yes,
and
yes, it does.
And suddenly it's the Necronomicon, and like you said, you're led to believe it's a real, tangible, physical book somewhere out in the world.
It really is a great creation.
Yeah. But then you got this item in some other film, and you find the film's really cool, and from that you can springboard into Lovecraft. But then on the other hand, you got this, it's called a modern lens, a modern way of looking at Lovecraft and his ideas and his views on society and people. So let's just call spade a spade. He was a bit racist, but
sure. So let me address that right now.
Yeah.
So here's the deal: racism is not a crime; it is a belief system. Yeah. Therefore, it needs to be repaired by education, not punishment. No. Right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is Lovecraft was absolutely racist. He was probably more racist than other people in his time period by a little bit. I mean, not a lot necessarily, but a little bit. But here's the other thing. He got less racist as he got older. And isn't that the way we want all racists to go?
Yeah.
So, his idea of society was that he wanted to have the government or rich people take care of amazing authors like him so he wouldn't have to work. So that's kind of a lame social system.
Yeah.
I don't particularly respect his political or economic views, though his scientific views were always really solid. Like he never has humanoid aliens, No. And of course I think humanoids would not exist in outer space. I think it's there's only one humanoid on Earth, right? Why would they exist anywhere else? We're a really unusual design compared to look at every other mammal or reptile or bird. It's like, but Lovecraft, so he never had them. That was cool.
Yeah. Not to get too much into a rabbit hole here, but what are your immediate thoughts then on people trying to cancel Lovecraft? Then?
I think that cancel culture is one of the worst developments of the modern age, and it should. And although I don't think anything should be banned, if I thought something should be banned, it would be that. Because trying to suppress free speech in any form is what leads us to totalitarianism. That is like the whole point of totalitarianism is to not let people think the wrong thoughts. And anyone that says we should keep people from saying this are on the side of Lenin and Mussolini and Pol Pot and Idi Amin, who want to control your thoughts. It's one thing to say they're bad, which is fine, and then present why they're bad.
Yeah.
It's another thing to not let them say it.
And if you're going to
as an example, look how the flat Earth thing has largely been destroyed by competing videos, right? Yeah. No one banned the flat Earth guys. They just brought things that, look, here's why it's false. That's how to attack racism. That's how to attack things that are bad. And like I said, Lovecraft didn't do it right. That's what you should do.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
If you're going to cancel Lovecraft over racism, then you have to cancel To Kill a Mockingbird as well, or Uncle Tom's Cabin. So,
I mean, To Kill a Mockingbird is actually anti-racist. So the fact they think it's racist shows how much they screwed up mentally.
Yeah.
Right. That they think that these books, which are written to stop prejudice and racism, are now seen as racist because I don't know why. It's like, it's insane, right? I mean, look, it's one thing to go around and say that Robert E. Lee was fighting for a bad cause in the Civil War, because he was, okay? And to say he shouldn't be honored, I'm fine with that. It doesn't mean we have to destroy his statues. Maybe move them somewhere else, or put a note saying, hey, he fought for one of the worst causes in human history. But trying to destroy our history, well, we know who does that. Yeah. It's not the good guys.
No, going, transitioning back into game design then.
Yes. I'm comfortable with this. I'm comfortable with the other thing too. It's pretty hard to ring my bell, but you can try.
I'll rather not. So the idea of making a role-playing game based on or set in the world of Lovecraft came to you from Chaosium, but how does then the idea of converting the mythos into a role-playing system, how did that come about?
Boy, that was tough. It's why it took me a year to write it. I was pondering all the things. I tried to make the monsters, and that wasn't right. Well, ultimately, what happened is that I came up with there was two things that were the hardest. One was how to make the monsters scary, and the other was how to represent the great old ones. And so with the monsters making them scary, I eventually came up with the idea that became the sanity system. And at the time, my thought was that players would have sanity, they'd see a monster, they'd lose some, and they'd go crazy, or faint, or run away, go hysterical. It would be bad for them, and if they lost all the sanity, they'd become a lunatic, right? And I thought this would be just another weapon that the monsters would use on players. In other words, the Shoggoth could eat you, or it could scare you too. I had no idea what it would lead to. So at the very first playtest of the sanity system, we were playing the scenario of the haunted house, which used to be in all the copies of Call of Cthulhu. So we're playing the scenario, and it's the first time it had been run, and the first time I'd used sanity, and I explained how it worked to the players. So the players, they found this spell that says summon arcane thing from outside. I didn't tell them what to summon, but it was a dimensional shambler.
A shambler is a tall, wide creature with a slack, loose hide and a blank, staring face. It is roughly humanoid with large hands and long talons. It is said to be, quote, not wholly ape and not wholly insect, end quote.
So they go down into the basement of the house, and they decide they're going to cast the spell. And I say, well, you got to get like black cat heads and black candles and do this stuff. So they get into all the stuff, and then they cast the spell. And then I say, oh, you hear a weird noise in the air and something starts to come through. I was going to have the dimensional shambler attack them. And one of the players said, I'm shutting my eyes. Another player says, I'm running into the corner and looking into the corner. Another guy said, I'm running upstairs. And I was like, I said, you would never do that in D&D.
No. Right?
And I suddenly realized that the sanity system was making the players act as though their characters were scared. And I'm not saying the players were scared necessarily, but they were behaving like it. And that's when I knew I had something. I said, this is going to be big for horror games. Have characters acting like they're scared. And that was that was the success. And it kind of came out of serendipity. I didn't realize it would do all the things it did. But man, that was effective. And the other thing that was less important was trying to figure out how to display the great old ones. And so I actually did it two different ways. I had one version where the great old ones were kind of just environmental effects. They just did things. You didn't have to fight them. And the other was I made them like giant monsters. And then the first edition, they published both versions. So it was like they didn't make up their mind. But then later on, in my Sandy Petersen's Cthulhu Mythos for 5e books and Pathfinder, I went back and made them environmental effects that grow and shrink over time, so that when Cthulhu is rising, then like first the angles start to go wrong, and then you can't run away, and then monsters start coming out of right, and this telepathy starts making you hallucinate, and it keeps building up, and that's true for all of the great old ones. So I may eventually see if I can get that into Call of Cthulhu, but the sanity system was pretty much there from the very first use. I mean, there was polishing, but it was. That was the thing, and that I think that's what made it cosmic horror. That your character, that when you're going to fight a monster, if you're in D&D, and you're going to fight a monster, it's like, well, these monsters could kill me. That's kind of scary. Yeah. You know, you're a little more afraid if it's undead because it sucks away your experience points. That's really bad. But in Call of Cthulhu, it's like you could literally lose control of your character. You could even become an enemy. You know, and so you're really nervous about the monsters. Plus, the whole cosmic horror thing means that you usually don't know what the monster is. You know, it's some awful thing from beyond space and time. And the game master is generally feeling fine with doing things like having Hounds of Tindalos make ice grow on your house, because why not? Maybe they can do that. Yep. And whereas in D&D, it's like you look up the blue dragon, you know exactly what it does. But that's not the case in the Call of Cthulhu. No. you were terrified. And of course, we also have no shortage of awesome movies and stories and other materials to steal ideas from. So I do that all the time in my games.
You run a lot of scenarios in Call of Cthulhu through the years. So what's then the Petersen secret to scare your fellow players?
Okay. I have a couple secrets. One of them is to use 2 or 3 senses when describing something. Instead of saying, you see the cultists, okay, that's the vision only. Say, you hear them chanting, the drone beats through your bones. So it's feeling and hearing, or like you smell the stink of burning flesh, and there's a smell. And the more senses you use, the more real it seems to the players. So that's the first thing I would do. The second thing I would do is the rules that M.R. James gave for doing horror, which he said, first, the monster has to be malign. It has to be he's writing for ghost stories. Yeah. But he said the ghost has to wish someone ill. It can't be a friendly ghost that wants to show you where the treasure is. And that's not usually a problem in Call of Cthulhu. Usually the monsters are pretty malign, but there's some people that want to whitewash the Yithians or the Fungi from Yoggoth and make them not all bad. And I guess you can do that if it makes you happy, but I prefer to have them be only negative influences on humanity. The second rule was, he said, set it somewhere where the reader, or in my case, the player, could reasonably imagine himself to be. I might be there. That's one of the reasons I put it in modern times. It's easier to imagine that you are on a 747 flying over the Atlantic than you are on a dirigible. Yeah. Right. And so that makes it, that brings it more home. If I could be there, then it's like scarier. As my example for this is actually the movie Alien. I mean, I'm never going to be on a spaceship probably, but in the movie Alien, which has cosmic horror, I feel, the spaceship looks like a crappy tramp vessel with like chains and condensation, and the guys are griping about their pay. And it seems like a realistic place. Like if there was a spaceship, that's probably the kind of one I'd be stuck on, you know? So it seems like a real place compared to Star Trek. You couldn't have cosmic horror on a Star Trek ship. Yep. It's too different. But Alien, you can, right? So, and the third rule was don't use jargon. In his case, he was saying don't talk about vibrations and things like that. In my case, I'm saying don't use game terminology as your go-to thing. In other words, if the monster hits a character for 7 points of damage, don't say you take 7 points of damage. Say it fastens its fangs into your shoulder, take 7 points of damage. You know, and then the player is like, oh, it's got fangs. And then later on, the player said, my shoulder is still hurting. And there's things you come out of it, right? Yeah. Or if you say, it's like, don't be like you're shocked to your soul, you know, that like your whole body is reacting. You're starting to shake. Maybe you'll faint. Make a sand. Then the sand roll is secondary to the effect you want. So those are some of my rules. Yeah. I think those will be effective for the players. I just filmed a video at a convention I was at last weekend, before I caught COVID. In fact, that's where I got it. This guy came up from Australia and a positive, it turned out. He didn't have symptoms. And then like, yay. So anyway, at this convention, I show how to create a horror scenario the Sandy Petersen way. And it's about 50 minutes long, and I go through the whole thing from start to finish. And we basically create it together. And I don't make up any of the things. I make the audience give ideas for the monster, for the setting, for the scenes, all that kind of stuff. That's not necessarily how to run a game, but it shows you how to create one. And so that'll be up sometime on either Petersen Games or my YouTube. So that'll be cool. And anyway, there's a bunch of rules for you.
So in a way, the key to holding your players' attention and keeping them on edge, let's say, is to maintain that sense of realism and but suspension of disbelief. Yes,
but you can't maintain terror forever. If you try to make a guy be scared for too long, they will start to giggle. That's just natural human reaction.
Yeah.
I've learned this in some horror movies. A horror movie where it's really scary for a long time. If it goes too long, the audience starts to laugh because you can't take it anymore. You go to something else. Yeah. They just laugh at themselves. So you can't. So you do have to have breaks. So in my games, we'll like stop and joke and stuff at times, but there's times when it's scary. So it's okay to have those breaks.
Yeah.
After all, you're supposed to have fun.
Yeah.
It's not like the whole thing should be comical, but you know, if a person is just committed suicide because a Shoggoth came pouring down the gangway of his ship, which happened in one of my adventures, then after he's dead, you can kind of laugh about it. It says, man, the only guy tough enough to kill your character was your character, that kind of thing, you know?
Yeah. I suppose if you're watching Jaws, it wouldn't be the same kind of movie if you saw the shark every 5 minutes.
That's right.
Yeah.
And in fact, Jaws has comic stuff in it.
Yeah.
There's funny parts. And often they're right after the scary parts. Like the scene where Roy Scheider is chumming for the shark and he doesn't see the shark come out of the water after him. Then he turns around and it's pretty scary. And he goes, we're going to need a bigger boat, you know? And it's funny. It's right after you see this terrifying shark. So it works.
Yeah.
Of course, you don't have to make up the jokes yourself as a game master. The players are going to do plenty of that for you.
Yeah. I suppose as long as you keep them engaged, that makes it easier for the players to create, to embody the world that you created. Let's say. Yeah. What I try to do is I have a few scenes planned ahead in my adventure, which are going to be like pretty cool, and I they don't always work, but I would say they work 70% of the time, and they're really effective. Now, and if I have 3 or 4 of them, then I get 2 or 3 really good scenes everyone likes. Then in between, it's more like they're doing research, they're having other things happen, and surprising the players is important to me too for fun. It's not necessarily makes it scarier, but it's like they're doing something and suddenly they get a shock, and it could be a good surprise or a bad surprise. They just get a surprise. Yeah. Time is rapidly running out here.
You better get your people's questions then.
Well, we'll get to a few listener questions here. But before we do that, I want to tell you, if you want to have your question asked in a future episode of this podcast, this will from now on be an exclusive feature on my Patreon. And by supporting the work that goes into each and every episode, you get early access and a lot of other goodies. Link is in the description of this episode. Check it out. Every little helps. Now, to the listener questions. Christopher wants to know, first off, he wants to know that, quote, many role-playing games have a focus on power and character advancement through experience, gear, and similar mechanisms. Call of Cthulhu is largely the opposite, a game where the object of resisting devolution becomes the primary concern. So what inspired this way of game design?
I was a contrarian. I didn't even know the word, but that was why I wanted to have a game where you weren't the elite special aristocracy that kills all the monsters, but you were the ordinary people taking on the horrors. That's right. And where your big victory is saving the world and no one can know, instead of getting a bunch of loot. In fact, the loot you get is usually a moldy old book that will drive you insane by looking at the pictures, right? I mean, one of the greatest ways to scare a guy in Call of Cthulhu is you find a magic staff with a little skull on the end, and they're like, I don't want to use that. That's going to do something really bad. So it's funny, right? Yeah. But yeah, that's the thing. I was contrarian. I was trying to do everything the opposite. And part of the reason was I realized that if I was going to make the monsters like a horror movie, you can't just go fight and kill the monsters in a horror movie. I mean, say it's a werewolf movie. You don't have the guys go and fight and kill the werewolf, right? It's a big scene at the end when you when you fight the werewolf, it kills you, right? So my monsters are tougher than werewolves. They're going to be impossible to kill. So the game can't be fixated on fighting. So I had to come up with something else, and that's where I came up with the idea of research and finding out clues and exploration and mystery. And so that mystery became the secret, and that was another way I was contrarian. So I guess I just didn't want to do things the way other people did them.
No. Also suppose if you did the exact same way as someone else did, like Gary Gygax, for example, then you probably just make a scarier version of Dungeons and Dragons.
That's right.
Yeah.
And which was what Chill was.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And that perfectly leads us into a second listener question, and that is, what is your impression of the D20 Call of Cthulhu, particularly given how the D20 systems are largely built on character progression and advancement?
I will admit that I have in fact not played the D20 Call of Cthulhu.
Okay.
So the deal with me is learning a new board game is pretty easy. It takes an hour reading the rules that I'm playing it. Role-playing games have longer and more complex rules, and you have to play it multiple sessions before you get a handle on what it's like. And most of the fun of a role-playing game isn't from the system anyway, it's from the players, right? I mean, so I figure, why should I learn a new system if I got the one I like that's working, unless I have a lot of people telling me I need to switch to it. And I haven't had people clamoring to switch to D20. And in effect, when I play Call of Cthulhu, that's my house system, right? It's the system I made up for using in my own games. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that better. I have no objection to people playing it. I think that advancement in Call of Cthulhu should be very different. Maybe, but hey, that's me.
Each to their own, I guess.
Each to their own.
Yeah. Where do you see the future of tabletop role-playing games heading in light of the massive increase in media attention, streams, and viewership, particularly regarding Dungeons and Dragons?
Well, people watch streams of playing Doom too, but they still want to play it on their own. I mean, one of the things that's I think we have in the future of D&D or other role-playing games is that with Zoom and other things like that, we can now play with people all across the world. Like my playtest for my upcoming board game Call of Cthulhu Terror Paths, which is basically a board game version of Call of Cthulhu. With characters, is I actually play this with people from yesterday I was playing. I had a guy from Belgium, a guy from England, and a guy from South Africa, and we're all playing together. And a guy from Costa Rica. We're all playing together because we can do it by Zoom. Yeah. So I was able to play. So we can reach out, and my friends that live in Germany, I can play with them, which I couldn't do if I just was in my house. Now there's still a virtue in being face to face. I like to do that when I can, and I'm looking forward to the. In fact, I was going to do it last Saturday, and then I got COVID, so I couldn't do it. So I think role-playing games are going to keep on going and be even stronger. Look, it's mass market now. Stranger Things has them playing D&D. Yeah. And in fact, when I watched Stranger Things, I didn't realize that it was set in the 1980s. At first, I got in 2 minutes after I started, and the characters are playing it, and they pull out their Demogorgon figure. Yeah.
Something is coming. Something hungry for blood. A shadow grows on the wall behind you, swallowing you in darkness. It is almost here. What is it?
What if it's the Demogorgon? Oh, Jesus, we're so screwed if it's the Demogorgon.
It's not the Demogorgon. An army of troglodytes charge into the chamber.
Troglodytes?
Told you.
It's a minifigs one, and that's the same figure I have that I bought back in 1977. So I was like, "Hey, how'd they get that old figure?" Then I realized it was in the 80s, and I'm like, "Man, they were accurate to get that figure."
Yeah.
But we no longer have the crazy people saying that D&D makes you kill each other, which is nice. Yeah. And they no longer have the crazy people that say that Doom makes you go on school shootings, which is nice.
That's also nice.
We have other crazy things we're doing now, but
it's not due to Call of Cthulhu or Dungeons and Dragons, at least.
It's currently not due to Call of Cthulhu, Dungeons and Dragons, or Doom, or anything else I do. So
yeah. In closing, that was the last of the listener question. But in closing, before I let you go, you mentioned your new tabletop board game, Cthulhu Terrace. When is that out for public consumption?
Terror Paths?
Yeah.
We are hoping to have some copies at Gen Con this year, air freighted from China, and the rest will be over here in October, is our plan.
Okay.
I did a playthrough of it that was filmed at the Chaosium convention, and that will also be posted. People can see it. And we have other things about it that I post online.
Okay.
I'm very excited for it.
Yeah.
And because it doesn't use figures, it does not delay in any of my other projects. So before someone asks about that.
Okay. Let's track that question then. Last question to end on a more of a poetic, more fitting note. At least that was the plan. How would you describe Sandy Petersen as a character, as a playable character in Call of Cthulhu? To rephrase it, what would his stats be, and would it be?
You're probably not surprised to learn that I have created him a couple times for Call of Cthulhu.
I would imagine, yes.
Usually what I do is I go into the meta game and say that, and give him abilities like badly balanced game rules so I can break the game, or didn't read the spell book so I can use any, crazy things like that. I can't do it without making fun of myself.
No.
So that's what I do. I'm also in the game Mythos where I can read glyphs, and I am a loyal guy with a combat of 2. And Greg Stafford only had a combat of 1, so I was better than him. I would say the best way to use me in the game is as someone that has the lore that can get you, you can go to as a resource, and then I get killed horribly by a monster partway through when you come to depend on me. That's how I would use me.
Yeah, that's what usually happens when I play Call of Cthulhu. So it's nice to hear we have that in common at least. Sandy Petersen, it's been a great pleasure to have you on this episode of my podcast, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to have a chat with me today.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here. Maybe someday we'll meet in Germany.
That
or
would
in
be
America.
amazing. Yeah. That would
Take
be
care.
amazing. I look forward to it. You've been listening to an episode of my podcast, Porträttpodden, or The Portrait in English. I've been your host, Mats Lasse Youngås, and my guest at this time was game creator and tabletop role-playing legend Sandy Petersen. Has this conversation sparked any ideas or questions, some thoughts or comments? I'd be happy to hear about them. You can reach Porträttpodden on Facebook or Instagram. Or if you wish, you can send an email to porträttpodden@gmail.com. That's porträttpodden@gmail.com. I'm looking forward to hear from you. During this episode, you heard sound clips from Stranger Things, a Netflix original, all rights reserved. The portrait works in accordance with the ethical code of practice of the Norwegian press. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be back with another inspiring story real soon.